And I honor the board for making the decisions that they have made to close the church for 2 weeks, to not do the potluck today, to not hold hands during the peace, and to mask. You know, when things appear to get better, we can become a little bit lax. And not that we did, but always going back to the beginning and starting again is a wise decision. And that is what we're going to be talking about together today. As wise as Solomon, standing in our power of wisdom. And let's see, the last time I was here, I think we talked about faith, didn't we? Yes, I love the 12 powers of unity. And so I was just thinking that since I'm coming to you once a month, maybe each month I would do one of the powers, and ultimately we'll get through all of them, unless you get a minister, and maybe he or she would like to do that too. But in the meantime, here I am with you, and I love it. So, the story of Solomon from the Old Testament is filled with love and lust, with battles, with overcoming, and with downfalls. The story is the story of our human experience. Each of us experience so many of the things that happen in the characters in the Old Testament. They are stories, there is some fact in all of them, but there's a lot of myth also. A lot of just an opportunity for people of the times to learn through the stories. When Solomon was born, his parents looked at this beautiful little baby and they named him Solomon, which means peace, because they knew that their baby was going to be a peaceful being filled with love for humankind. Metaphysically, in our life, what Solomon means is the uniting of wisdom and love in our highest consciousness. And we know that when love and when wisdom are combined, that we always experience a profound sense of peace. So just holding in our minds that we are love and wisdom combined, which creates that peace that we feel like we all did during our meditation today. Solomon came to the throne when he was only 12 years old. And even as a child, he was wise, and he wanted to be an effective ruler. And so he called to God, and he said, God, I need your help. And of course, as happens in the Old Testament stories, God came down to Solomon, and he said, what can I help you with? And Solomon said, I want to be a wise ruler. God granted him the wisdom to be a wise ruler. But because he was so impressed that this boy of 12 years old would have such a profound desire, he gave Solomon much more. He gave him the ability to talk to all animals. He gave him the ability to tame all demons. And we know that metaphysically our demons are just our own false thoughts. But in the Old Testament days, they really did believe that there were demons. Being so wise and being able to have all of these skills, God thought, I am going to give Solomon one more thing. And he gave him great, great wealth. So with all of this that Solomon had, his story traveled far and wide, and he was well thought of. And then something happened. Solomon, the story tells us, had 300 wives and 700 concubines. He was a very busy man. And many of these women were from foreign countries. And they worshipped other deities beyond the one source, the one God. And not only did Solomon allow for this and provide for this for his women, he also began to worship some of these other deities beyond the true God, the one God that had given him the one desire that he wanted, which was to be an effective ruler. This angered God. And after Solomon died and his son took the throne, the kingdom of Israel was split. And the major success, perhaps, of Solomon's reign was building the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. And the kingdom remained split until hundreds of years later, when the Temple of Jerusalem fell. Solomon died a dejected, old, not respected man. It's an amazing story, isn't it? Isn't it the story of humankind? Not each one of us, but in these stories we can each see parts of us, parts of who we are. So what might the story of Solomon tell us about our own lives? What might we take away today from the story of Solomon that we can use? I think perhaps the most important thing is that we need to remember that just like Solomon, every one of us has wisdom right inside of us. It is one of our inherent birthrights. It is one of the 12 powers that Charles Fillmore talked about. And our power of wisdom rests right here in our solar plexus. It's the color of yellow. And it is our ability to discern and to make right decisions. And when we pay attention to this area right here, and we're in the process of trying to make a decision, or when we're moving on the path of our life, haven't you noticed that sometimes you just feel this feeling of yum right here? This is good. I know this is a good decision. I know I'm on my path. And then sometimes we have that feeling of yuck. It's like, this isn't quite right for me. But if you're like me, sometimes I get that feeling of yum, and I think, this is more than I can do. No, this is beyond me. Surely this is a mistake. And I don't follow. I don't listen to that wisdom. And I miss my opportunity. And then sometimes I get that feeling of yuck. But I want so badly whatever it has been that I override it. And it often doesn't work out quite as well, does it? No. So our job in using our power of wisdom, our power to discern, is to learn more and more to listen to our own body, to what it's telling us, what it's showing us, to help us stay on that high path. It's not that when we make the wrong decision, we're not spiritual. It doesn't mean that God doesn't love us, that we're not part of the whole. But it means we've taken a little byway. And sometimes those byways are really beautiful, and then they get sort of rocky and not so great, and we know we have to come back to the main path. Sometimes we know pretty early on. So we know that we have this power within us. We have been born with all the wisdom we need for our lifetime. It's just that we need to learn to use it, to remember it is our gift. We didn't even have to say, God, I'd like wisdom so that I can be a fine person. No, it was born right here, right within us. Another thing that we can learn from our story of Solomon is that we can seek guidance. I don't think I said this when I was telling Solomon's story, but Solomon, like all kings, had advisors. And he listened to his advisors, and sometimes he followed, and sometimes he didn't. But you and I also have guides in our life. And we need to ask for guidance when we need it, asking our higher power always, but knowing that on this earthly plane, we have our own guides. And have you ever noticed that sometimes when you're struggling with something or you have a question that you'd like an answer to, you'll be driving and the license plate ahead of you just says the right words on their personalized plate. Or wow, look at that board, that billboard. That's just what I needed to hear. It is amazing where messages come from when we're open to receiving. And not just saying, oh, well, that was just on a license plate or that was just on a billboard. No, God speaks to us in myriad ways. It's up to us to keep our eyes and our ears open so that we see and so that we hear. Another thing from the story of Solomon is that we have to remember that we too can begin to worship gods other than the one power and the one source, active as the universe in our life, our first principle. We get pulled into worshiping more money. We get pulled into worshiping more fame. We get pulled into worshiping, not just respecting and loving, but worshiping others that we may think are better than we are. What our job is to do is to always remember that these are channels for our good, our money, our fame, what we have, people that we may think are better than we are, that we can look to as a model perhaps. These are channels for our good. The source of our good is always the one God, the one power. And when we remember that, we see channels everywhere where our good is always coming to us. In her book, Adventures in Resilience, Sharon Connors, who's a Unity writer, tells us that spirit never talks in confused tones. It is never a convoluted message. That when you hear or see Spirit speaking, it is done in a way that is unique for you to understand. Carolyn and Carolyn may not understand the way this Carolyn does. But what we do know is if it is the voice of Spirit speaking within us, it is clear. We don't have to guess what it means. When I became the minister of my church up in Redding, I was struggling. I had been doing it in the interim after we lost our minister. And the church did a search. And I was not on the search team because I was serving as the minister. And as I learned, because we know that everybody talks, I sort of knew the history of the people that applied. And I thought, you know what, I'm not a minister yet, but I can do this. I can do this. But I shouldn't put my name in the hat because of this, that, and the other thing. And loud as day, a voice came to me saying, Carolyn, stop fighting your destiny. I put my name in the hat, and for 7 years I was the minister at Unity Church in Redding. It wasn't something I was necessarily seeking. I liked the leadership role. I love working with people. But God was saying, you know, for right now, your job is to move into that position. And I am so grateful that I listened. In her book, Sharon tells a story. She lived in San Rafael. And she had a beautiful home. She had a good job in San Francisco. She had many friends. She could see the bay right from her beautiful windows in her home. And she said over again to many, I will never leave this area. It is wonderful. Well, she learned that there was a position available at Unity World Headquarters. And a little voice said to her, you know, Sharon, you might be interested in applying for this. For 4 months, she waited. She listened, but she was not willing to take the step. And then one day the voice became so loud to her that she went to Unity Village and she applied for the job. While she was taking a run on some of the beautiful trails that are in and near the village, she heard a voice that said, "You are going to love living here." 2 weeks later, she was given the job and she moved to Unity Village. And in fact, she did love it. She listened. She overrode her own words of saying, "Never, I will never leave where I am now." And she took that next step. She said yes. So how do we follow? How do we know when Spirit is speaking to us, whether to move immediately, whether to wait? What are we to do? Well, I know for myself, and so since I am pretty much like you are, I know for you too, that it is very hard to be patient. Isn't it difficult when we desire something? We've set an intention. We're clear on our intention. We're willing to hold to the outcome we want without being attached to that outcome. So there's an opportunity for something new to come in. But sometimes, if it doesn't come fast enough, we push the river. Or sometimes, what we do is we drag our feet so long the opportunity passes by. So we have to be patient, but we also need to combine our patience with our wisdom so that we hear when the right time to move is. I was struggling with something on my way down this morning, and I had gotten myself in a situation that I wasn't entirely comfortable with, but I didn't know quite what I wanted to do with it. And so, you know, it's not an ugly drive from Redding, where I was this last week, to Oroville. I mean, the trees are beautiful and it was nice. But you have no idea how much I missed of that, because I was in my mind trying to work out my issue. At some point, recently, a year or so ago, I took a class called The Presence Process, and based on that book. It's a very good book. And I remembered, be here now. Just what Ram Dass said, be here now. And I brought myself back, and I would come back, and then I would drift again, and then I would come back. And my last 15 or 20 miles were really quite lovely, remembering that the only time is here and now, that my concerns will take care of themselves in the right time. But that was my wisdom speaking, reminding me, oh, the presence process says, I am here, I am now with this. That is what our wisdom does for us. As well as having patience, we can use an affirmation. We can say, I know what to do and I do it. Sometimes I think that we sort of use, or I certainly sort of use affirmations almost as throwaways. They become just little things to say, and I can pretend that I'm doing something really spiritual by saying an affirmation. Well, you know what? That's not quite how our affirmations work, is it? No, we go into our space, we become conscious, and we say our affirmation, knowing that it is the truth. And when we say our affirmation, and when we know the truth of it, then we know when to move and when to stay. I had some congregants once who didn't know what to do, when to do it. They were elderly, and they had children that lived in the Bay Area, and the children wanted them to move to the Bay Area, and they didn't want to. They wanted to remain in Redding. But the children said, and they were well into adulthood, their children said, come down here. We want you to just see what's here. Well, Doug and Marie went down, and they were just completing in that area a brand new retirement home. And it was one of those multi-level homes that you could go in and have your own apartment, but you could move up if it were necessary for help. There happened to be an apartment available that was looking out over the bay. It was beautiful. They had a lunch there, so they knew the food was good. And their children said, you know, this is great. Can't you do this? Wouldn't this be good? And Doug and Marie said, no, we really love Reading. Anyway, we can't afford this. Well, over the next couple of months, something happened, and the prices in this beautiful place were lowered. And Doug and Marie began thinking, might not be bad to be able to see the bay every day. Might not be bad to not have to cook 3 meals a day. And they went. They knew what to do, and they did it. But they didn't rush willy-nilly into it, and they didn't wait so long that the opportunity passed them by. They listened to their wisdom. So like Sharon Connor, and like Doug and Marie, you and I can set our intentions. When they begin to manifest, we know what to do, and we do it. We're patient enough until we know the timing is right. And we access our wisdom. And often we say things like, well, I have wisdom, or she has wisdom. We are wisdom. And so we be wisdom. We pray wisdom. We act wisdom. We use the wisdom that is our inherent birthright and that has been given to us freely and with grace. So have fun this week. I know I'm going to. Am I going to let my thing go, or am I going to use my wisdom? And just have fun watching yourself. When are you being wise? When are you being discerning? When are you sort of pushing the river? Or when are you sort of pulling back too far? That's what's fun about our spiritual practices, is we can watch ourselves and we can play with it. And that's what makes it the spiritual path that we want to stay on. So I'm going to be doing this with you. Have a glorious week. I love you and thank you for inviting me.